The photograph was taken in the winter of 1895, a stiff little thing mounted on fading cardstock, its edges scalloped like lace. At first glance, it showed two girls standing barefoot on packed snow, their dresses too thin for the season, their hair pinned tight, as if obedience alone could keep them warm. The older girl faced the camera with a solemn patience common to children taught not to move. The younger stood slightly behind her, hand clasped in her sister's, head tilted at an angle that suggested either curiosity or fatigue. For over a century, no one found anything strange about it. It sat quietly in an archive drawer, cataloged under domestic portraits. Its emulsion yellowing, silver salts breaking down in the predictable, harmless ways of age. Visitors passed it without comment. Scholars glanced and moved on. It was ordinary. Comfortably so. The unease began only when the image was restored. As the chemical stains were lifted and the contrast sharpened, details emerged that had not been visible before. Frostbite scars on the older girl's ankles, a faint bruise blooming beneath the younger one's sleeve, and a shadow pooled at their feet that did not match the direction of the winter sun. These discoveries were noted, discussed, archived. Then the technician paused. The younger girl's hand, small, pale, fingers gently curled, was not holding her sister's hand at all. It was holding something else. The grip was too tight, the angle wrong. The fingers wrapped around a hand that emerged from behind the older girl's skirt, larger than a child's. The knuckles pronounced, the skin stretched thin, as if over something not quite human. As the image resolved further, a thumb became visible where no thumb should have been, bent backward at an impossible joint. The girls' faces remained unchanged. But their eyes, now clearer than they had ever been, were not looking at the camera. They were looking at whoever was standing there now. The first sign that something was wrong did not arrive with drama or spectacle. It came quietly, hidden in precision. When the restoration began, the photograph was treated like any other artifact of its age, gently cleaned. Scanned at high resolution, its faded contrast digitally coaxed back toward clarity. At low fidelity, the two girls appeared exactly as history remembered them. One older, one younger, hands joined in a gesture so familiar it barely registered as worthy of notice. The human mind filled in the gaps automatically. Sisters hold hands. Children cling to one another. The image made sense because it had always made sense. But restoration is not an act of imagination. It is an act of measurement. As layers of grime and chemical decay were peeled away pixel by pixel, the technician noticed that the negative space between the girl's arms behaved oddly. The shadows did not soften as expected. Instead, they sharpened, gaining definition rather than losing it. At first, this was assumed to be a quirk of the lighting, or an artifact of the original exposure. Early photography was imperfect after all. Glass plates warped, emulsions blood. Nothing about that era was exact. Still, the hand remained troubling. When magnified, the younger girl's fingers were too elongated, their joints slightly misaligned, as if they had been stretched and reassembled by someone working from memory rather than anatomy. This alone might have been dismissed. Children's hands are delicate, perspective distorts. But the real problem lay in the opposing hand, the one being held. Its proportions were wrong in a way that perspective could not excuse. The wrist emerged from behind the older girl's skirt at an angle that implied an arm passing through fabric rather than around it. The bones beneath the skin formed unfamiliar contours, ridges where none should exist, smooth expanses where joints should have broken the surface. Most unsettling of all was the thumb. It bent backward, not dramatically, but subtly, like a joint designed to articulate in a direction the human body does not allow. The nail was visible, long and narrow, its cuticle recessed too deeply into the flesh. There was no sign of injury or deformity, no scars, no swelling. The hand was intact, purpose-built. The technician cross-referenced the original scan with earlier reproductions, expecting to find that the anomaly had been introduced by modern processing. But the shape persisted. Even in the most degraded versions of the image, the hand was there, lurking in the blur, its wrongness softened only by low resolution. The mind had simply ignored it, smoothing the impossible into the plausible. A trick of perception, a mercy perhaps. When skeletal overlays were applied to map bone structure beneath the skin, the software failed repeatedly. Algorithms trained on thousands of human hands could not reconcile what they were seeing. The spacing between metacarpals was inconsistent. One finger appeared to contain an extra phalanx. Another lacked one entirely. The wrist joint did not align with any known radius, ulna configuration. The program flagged the hand as corrupted data. It was then that the technician noticed something colder, something more precise. The hand did not belong to either girl. The older sister's arm was fully visible, her sleeve terminating cleanly at her wrist, her hand relaxed at her side. The younger sister's arm extended forward, yes, but the musculature did not support the grip she appeared to have. Her forearm was too slender, the tension in her fingers unsupported by the structure above it. She was holding something heavier than herself, something anchored elsewhere. The implication settled slowly, like dust in an undisturbed room. If the hand did not belong to the older girl, and could not belong to the younger one, then there was a third presence in the frame. One the photograph had never acknowledged outright. One concealed not by darkness, but by assumption. The camera had seen it. The chemical plate had recorded it faithfully. Only the viewer had refused to recognize it. Further enhancement revealed pressure marks on the younger girl's palm. Indentations consistent with a grip being returned, rather than given. Her fingers were not resting. They were wrapped, knuckles whitening, skin compressed against something solid and resistant. This was not a child seeking comfort. This was a child being held in place. The longer the image was studied, the more the hand asserted itself. It seemed to draw focus, pulling the eye back no matter where one tried to look. The longer one stared, the more certain it became that the hand was not intruding into the photograph, but anchoring it, as though the rest of the scene had been arranged around that single point of contact, the moment when flesh met something that should not have been there, and the photograph, obedient and blind, recorded it anyway. The archival discrepancy did not announce itself as a contradiction at first. It emerged as a footnote, a clerical detail uncovered during routine verification, the sort of thing that normally resolved itself with a corrected date or a misspelled surname. Once the anomaly in the photograph had been documented, the next logical step was to confirm the identities of the two girls. Names were already attached to the image, penciled on the back of the mounting card in a neat, old-fashioned hand. Sisters. Same household. Same winter. Nothing unusual. Still, procedure demanded confirmation, and so the technician requested parish records, census rolls, burial registries. Paper ghosts that rarely lied, only forgot. The elder sister was easy to trace. Her name appeared consistently across documents: baptismal record, school ledger, census listing. She survived into adulthood, married, moved counties, left behind the predictable trail of ink that marked a life lived long enough to be counted. The younger sister was more elusive. Her name appeared in the same baptismal registry, written in the same brown ink. But after that, the trail thinned abruptly. No school enrollment, no census mark beyond infancy. That alone was not alarming. Childhood mortality was common in the 19th century. Many children simply vanished from the record. What mattered was when. The burial registry arrived 2 days later, its pages brittle, its handwriting cramped and economical. The younger sister's name was there, unmistakable, listed among others lost to winter illness. The date of death preceded the date of the photograph by nearly 3 years. The cause was recorded in a single word, abbreviated and faded, but legible enough: fever. At first, the technician assumed an error. Dates were miscopied all the time. Photographs were often mislabeled years after they were taken. It was entirely possible the image had been incorrectly attributed to 1895. Glass plates were reused. Archives were imperfect. This was not evidence of anything beyond human inconsistency, but the photograph itself resisted correction. The studio mark on the card stock matched a location that did not exist before late 1894. The photographer's imprint was traceable, his business records intact. His ledger listed a sitting for 2 children from that household in January of 1895, payment rendered in full. There was no record of a reshoot, no earlier appointment, no ambiguity in the timeline. The photograph had been taken when the records said it had been taken, which meant the younger sister could not have been alive. To resolve the conflict, secondary sources were consulted. Letters, family Bibles, personal correspondences. A surviving diary from a distant relative mentioned the child's death in passing, the tone casual in the way grief becomes when time dulls it. Little one taken before her 5th winter. The entry read, another letter described the elder sister standing alone at the burial, refusing to let go of the coffin until she was pulled away. There was no mention of a photograph taken afterward. No explanation, no miracle recovery. The contradiction hardened. If the burial record was correct, and it was corroborated repeatedly, then the photograph depicted a child who had already been buried. Not metaphorically, not in error. Literally placed into the ground, coffin sealed, earth packed, the rituals observed and completed. The image was not misdated. The studio was real. The appointment was logged. The payment was made. Someone had brought 2 children to that sitting. This realization altered the way the photograph was viewed. The younger sister's posture, once read as shyness, now suggested something else entirely. Her feet did not quite rest on the snow. Her shadow did not fully connect to her body. Her face, previously softened by the blur of age, now appeared strangely slack, as if the muscles beneath the skin were no longer fully engaged in the work of expression. The eyes, already unsettling, seemed hollowed by a fatigue deeper than childhood exhaustion. More disturbingly, the elder sister's grip took on new meaning. She was not holding a sibling. She was anchoring something that should not have been standing there at all. Her fingers dug in with a tension that spoke of effort, of resistance. This was not remembrance. This was containment. Attempts were made to explain the impossibility rationally. Perhaps the burial record referred to a different child with the same name. Perhaps the photograph was staged with a stand, in a morbid Victorian practice of memorial imagery. But memorial photographs were well documented, and this image did not conform. The younger sister was upright, eyes open, no artificial supports visible. No post-mortem rigidity, no signs of preparation. She looked present, participatory, alive by all visual standards. Yet the paper trail refused to bend. The archivists involved began to notice an unsettling pattern. Each time the younger sister's name was spoken aloud in the context of the photograph, conversation faltered, words slipped. Dates were misremembered moments after being read. It was not dramatic, no sudden chills or flickering lights, but a subtle erosion of certainty, as if the mind itself resisted holding both truths at once. Dead children stayed dead. Photographs recorded the living. The contradiction demanded resolution, and the easiest resolution was denial. But the photograph did not allow itself to be dismissed. The final confirmation came from an exhumation report, commissioned decades after the burial during a cemetery relocation. The remains of the younger sister were documented, measured, cataloged. The bones matched the age, the growth patterns, the dental records. She had not been moved. She had not escaped. She was still there, exactly where she had been placed. And yet, she stood in the photograph anyway. The decision to restore the photograph again was made reluctantly, framed as a matter of verification rather than curiosity. The first restoration had already produced more questions than answers, and no one involved was eager to invite further complications. Still, the logic was difficult to argue with. Digital restoration is, by nature, an interpretive process. Algorithms make choices. Human hands adjust curves, shadows, and thresholds. If the image contained something genuinely anomalous, then repeating the process under controlled conditions should either confirm or dispel the irregularities. Consistency would mean truth. Variance would mean error. The second restoration was conducted independently, using different software, different technicians, and a fresh scan of the original plate. No reference images were provided. The team was instructed only to recover the photograph as faithfully as possible, avoiding any enhancements that could introduce artifacts. When the results were delivered, they were not compared immediately. Each technician submitted their final image separately, sealed, time-stamped, and logged. The first envelope was opened in silence. At a glance, the photograph looked familiar. Two girls, winter setting, the same rigid posture. But the longer it was examined, the clearer the differences became. The younger sister's face appeared sharper in this version, her eyes more alert, almost intent. The hand she was holding was still present, still wrong, but altered. The thumb no longer bent backward as dramatically. Instead, it appeared elongated, tapering to a point that seemed too narrow to support a nail. The wrist was partially obscured, dissolving into shadow where fabric should have been. The second envelope revealed a different configuration entirely. Here, the hand was thicker, the knuckles swollen, the skin textured in a way that suggested age rather than youth. The fingers bore faint creases, not from movement, but from something like folding, as though the hand had been held in a single position for too long. The younger sister's grip was looser in this version, her fingers barely touching the surface of the other hand, as if contact were optional rather than enforced. Most unsettling was the position of the arms. It extended from behind the older sister at a height that implied a body standing taller than either child. The third restoration deviated further. In this image, the hand was almost delicate, slender. The fingers were too numerous at first glance, overlapping in a way that made counting difficult. When isolated and traced, they resolved into 5, but the spacing between them was inconsistent, as if the hand had been assembled from parts that did not share a common scale. The skin tone was lighter than in previous versions, nearly blending with the snow. The younger sister's face, meanwhile, appeared blurred, her features softening into something indistinct, as though her presence in the frame were becoming negotiable. There was no longer any question of software error. Each restoration had been produced from the same original plate, using rigorous controls. Yet each revealed a different truth. Not merely different details, but different realities. The photograph was not stabilizing as clarity increased. It was diverging. The more precisely it was examined, the less singular it became. Further attempts only deepened the inconsistency. A fourth restoration introduced faint impressions in the snow that resembled additional footprints, partially erased, leading away from the girls rather than toward them. A fifth showed no hand at all, Only the younger sister's fingers curled around empty air, her knuckles white with tension, as if the object she held had been removed between exposures. In that version, the shadow at their feet was wrong in a new way, branching into multiple directions at once. Metadata offered no explanation. Each file was internally consistent, its edits traceable, its processes logged. There was no evidence of tampering, no sign that the original scan had changed. And yet, when the restorations were overlaid, their discrepancies could not be reconciled. The photograph did not converge toward a single, objective state. It behaved instead like a choice engine, selecting a different configuration each time it was asked to clarify itself. Those working with the image began to experience subtle disturbances. Technicians reported difficulty recalling which version they had last seen. When asked to describe the hand from memory, their accounts conflicted, even when they had examined the same file minutes earlier. Notes taken during analysis no longer matched the images they referenced. Measurements drifted. Annotated screenshots failed to correspond to the files they were meant to document. It became clear that the photograph was not passively revealing information. It was responding. Each restoration was, in effect, a new question posed to the image, and the image answered differently each time. Not randomly, but deliberately, as though it were testing the limits of recognition, probing how much inconsistency the human mind would tolerate before breaking. The idea that there had ever been a single, correct version of the photograph began to feel naive. The most troubling discovery came when an early, unedited scan was reopened for comparison. Against expectation, it no longer matched the original baseline. Details that had not been present before now lingered faintly in the blur, as if traces from the restorations had bled backward into the source. The photograph was not only changing between versions, it was changing itself. The first indication that the photograph responded to touch was dismissed as coincidence, a misattribution born from fatigue and suggestion. During a late session, the technician steadied the mounting card with 2 fingers while adjusting the scan, and the room's ambient hum faltered for just a moment, the fluorescent lights dimming as if a circuit had been briefly overloaded. No alarms triggered. The power logs showed nothing. When the fingers were withdrawn, the hum returned to normal. It was an old building. Electrical inconsistencies were common. No one recorded the incident. It happened again the following day. This time, contact was deliberate. The technician needed to realign the plate within its housing and pressed a thumb against the lower edge. Careful to avoid the emulsion, the instant skin met card stock. The image on the monitor sharpened on its own, contrast adjusting without input. The girl's outlines darkened, the snow at their feet gaining texture. More unsettling was the sensation reported by the technician, a faint pressure against the thumb. Not the resistance of paper, but something yielding slightly, as if the photograph possessed depth where none should exist. The thumb was pulled away reflexively. The image reverted. From that point forward, contact was logged meticulously. Gloves were introduced, first cotton, then nitrile. With gloves on, nothing happened. The photograph behaved as expected, inert and compliant. When bare skin was reintroduced, even briefly, anomalies followed. Monitors flickered. Files corrupted, and then repaired themselves without intervention. In one instance, a smudge that had been present for decades vanished entirely after a technician brushed it with the side of their hand. The most significant reaction occurred when the photograph was lifted. As it was raised from the table, supported by 2 hands, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, enough for breath to fog. The image on the nearest screen shifted, not in clarity, but in composition. The younger sister's head tilted by a fraction of a degree, her gaze adjusting downward, no longer aligned with the camera, but with the hands holding the photograph now. The movement was subtle, plausible enough to be argued away, but everyone in the room saw it. What followed was experimentation under increasingly controlled conditions. A single fingertip placed against the card stock produced localized changes, shadows deepened near the point of contact, details resolving as if drawn toward warmth. When a palm was pressed flat against the back of the photograph, the effect expanded. The older sister's posture stiffened, her shoulders rising imperceptibly. The hand, whichever version of it the photograph chose to display in that moment, tightened its grip. Reality beyond the image began to respond as well. A technician reported that after prolonged contact, she could not unclench her own hand for several minutes, her fingers locked in the same curved position as the younger sister's. Another described the sensation of standing on packed snow despite being indoors, the ache of cold creeping into the soles of his feet. These effects faded, but they did not vanish immediately, lingering like after images. The photograph was isolated, placed on a non-conductive surface, shielded from direct handling. Even so, proximity alone began to matter. Those who spent too long near it experienced disorientation, difficulty distinguishing memory from observation. One archivist insisted she could hear fabric rustling whenever she leaned close. The sound of heavy cloth shifting behind her, though the room remained empty. The most alarming incident occurred during a haptic analysis test, conducted under strict supervision. A pressure, sensitive pad was placed beneath the photograph to measure any physical response to touch. When a bare hand was lowered onto the image, the sensor spiked violently. The reading suggested not downward pressure, but resistance from below, as if something were pushing back. At the same moment, a crash echoed from an adjacent storage room. Shelving collapsed without warning, metal buckling inward, not outward, as though struck from within. Reviewing the footage later revealed something worse. At the moment of contact, the photograph's frame darkened along its edges, not uniformly, but in the shape of fingers curling inward. The outline did not match the technician's hand. It was larger, longer, the joints positioned wrong. The image appeared to be reaching out, not into the room, but into the structure of the building itself, mapping points of weakness, testing boundaries. From then on, the photograph was treated less like an artifact and more like an interface. It did not merely depict a moment. It mediated one. Touching it established a connection, however brief, between the present and whatever state the image represented. And that state was not fixed in the past. It was active, persistent, pressing gently, but insistently against the constraints that held it. The working theory shifted. The photograph was no longer considered reactive. It was participatory. It altered its environment not out of malice, but necessity, adjusting the world around it to better accommodate what it contained. The girls were not reaching out. They were being held in place, and every touch weakened that hold just enough for something else, to test the space beyond the frame,